So you want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, right off the top, you probably heard that, you probably saw that new open that I've got. That's Ron Placone. He's a national touring comedian. He's a regular, he's a big YouTuber. He's a regular on the Jimmy Dore show as an example. He's a friend of Podcast by George, and he did that new open for us, and I wanted everybody to get a good look and listen to that. That's Ron Placone doing Podcast by George, kind of in the style of Joe Strummer and The Clash, maybe. But anyway, thanks, Ron. We'll use that once in a while. Of course, we've still got our good buddy Bob Pace doing a lot of opens and closes. Desharm Jones, Matt Woods music. We use him on there a lot, but that's from Ron Placone. And the other thing I wanted to open with here, I wanted to start off with this news item, which is kind of silly, but it's kind of real. We'll see what you think of this, and it'll dovetail into what we're going to talk about today with our guest that I'm delighted to have back, Matthew Ho. And we're going to get to Matt here very shortly, but the open that I wanted to have here is that I have gotten from an unconfirmed report from an anonymous source that Iowa State University is going to announce August 1st that they ain't playing football this year because of the pandemic. Yeah, and I haven't been able to... Now, this is an unconfirmed report from an anonymous source. Now, that's critical because what does that mean? That means some guy told me that doesn't want to be identified. Does that mean it's not true? No. Does it mean that if I was a real working world journalist, I would go out and bust my butt to get another source, get people on the record, and do due diligence for journalism like I used to? Yeah. But I'm not going to do that because I'm in retirement and this is Podcast by George. If that comes true, I wanted to have this recorded on the podcast so that I can point towards it. But the point that I want to make about that sourcing is you see that all the time now. Are you watching cable news? Are you watching CNN? Are you watching MSNBC? Are you reading the New York Times? Did you see the Afghanistan bounty story as an example? That's CIA spooks feeding information to the New York Times. It gets repeated in the Washington Post. It gets picked up by MSNBC. It comes to CNN, and it's unconfirmed reports. It's from anonymous sources. It's really weak. And, of course, it also begs credulity. I mean, it's honest to God, how dumb of... I looked at that, and I saw that thin sourcing from these CIA guys. And my God, that's not... They're not going on the record. That's not real. And besides that, why in the hell would the Afghanistans need to have Russians paying them bounties to kill United States soldiers that have been in their country at war for 19 years? We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Afghan war, and here comes this CIA spook-fed story right as peace talks are opening with the Taliban, and there's a move in Congress to get us the hell out of Afghanistan. I mean, that is paper thin. So anyway, long story short, I wanted to bring that up on the podcast. Look at these things more critically. Look at the sources in these stories, and then just use some basic common sense when you're looking at these things. Well, okay, so the other justification, the other reason that I wanted to do this podcast, I'm really disgusted. I'm pissed off. I'm as disgusted as I probably have been over any news story in recent years. You know, when I was in the workforce and I had my head down and I was struggling to stay alive in the corporate world. I'd worked in two dying industries, basically. I'd started off as a journalist in radio news that was a dying industry, and then I went to work in marketing, basically in the magazine industry. And so it was a life and death battle every single day. I didn't have a lot of time to watch and follow the news as closely as I should. Now I am in retirement, and what I am seeing is shocking and appalling. And this guy's not shocking and appalling. This is Matthew Ho coming on Podcast by George again on the live line. Matt, welcome back.
Hi. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me on.
Well, and I could read the entire bio, but I want to start off with why I'm bringing you on. And maybe you can just give us a little thumbnail here on your background as far as Iraq and Afghanistan is concerned.
Well, yeah, I was, excuse me, I was in the Marine Corps for 10 years. I was in Iraq twice, once as a Marine Corps company commander and once on a State Department team. And then I was in Afghanistan as a State Department official on a State Department team in Afghanistan in 2009. And then the rest of the time before I left the State Department in 2009, I was in D.C. working on war policy, basically.
Well, let me just read this from Common Dreams to get us started here, because this is what's got my shorts in a bunch, and this is why I brought Matt on today. This, again, from Common Dreams. Anti-war groups vowed to keep fighting to slash the bloated Pentagon budgets after the House of Representatives Tuesday rejected a proposal to cut U.S. military spending by 10% and invest those savings in housing, health care, and education in poor communities. The final vote on the National Defense Authorization Act amendment proposed by Representatives Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan up there in Wisconsin was 93 to 324. 139 Democrats joined 185 Republicans in voting no. The failure of the Lee-Pocan amendment means the final version of the House NDAA will propose a $740.5 billion military budget for fiscal year 2021, a more than $2 billion increase from the previous year. So, Matt, this is what's got me disgusted, up in arms. Maybe we can get to this a little bit later, but I donated to, my wife phone banked and put yard signs out in 2018 for a couple of representatives here in the great state of Iowa that voted against that amendment. And I mean, I'm shocked and appalled. Maybe I'm catching up to this slow because, like I said, I just retired a couple of years ago. I'm starting to look around at the landscape and I'm going, what the hell? Were you as shocked and appalled by this as I am?
I think there's always perennial shock at the indecency of it, of the obscenity of our spending on the military and on wars. I mean, like, to put that in perspective so people understand, that $745 billion is just one part of the overall military and war-making budget of the United States government. First, just that, and that $745 billion is what's called the Pentagon base budget. So that's the money that just goes directly to the Pentagon to fund the armed services. But that $745 billion itself is larger than the next 9 or 10 countries combined. We spend 3 times as much as the Chinese do on our military. We spend almost 10 times as much or even more than the Russians do on their military. I mean, like I said, you can combine the next the next 9 or 10 countries, and we spend more than they do. And then in terms of totality, the actual figure is about $1.2 trillion that the United States spends every year on military intelligence, veterans. Just the number that I like to put out there that causes people to kind of fall and I hear this is that the third largest item in the federal discretionary budget, and it's not really discretionary because this is debt and interest payments I'm talking about, but the debt and interest payments on past military and war spending totals over $150 billion each year. So if just our debt and interest payments on what we spent on the military in the past was a separate department in the federal government, only the Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs would be larger than our past spending in terms of interest and debt payments. And, to give you an example of how this works. So for the Iraq and Afghan wars, we have spent already $750 billion on interest payments on the Iraq and Afghan wars. And according to research, people who know this stuff, like at Brown University or UMass Amherst, or the people at the National Priorities Project that Institute for Policy Studies, or say my colleague at the Senate for International Policy, Bill Hartung. That total is going to be, by the time we're finished paying for the Iraq and Afghan wars, we're going to spend, just on interest and debt payments for those wars, $6 trillion. That's just interest and debt payments. That's not the actual cost of the wars. That's not like paying for veterans like myself for healthcare for the rest of our lives and for our disability and everything. I mean, like, so the amount of this money is really, you think back to, you use a term, Leviathan, in a sense that it is its own living organism. And I have people ask me about the deep state all the time. And, I don't like that term because it's got such a connotation now, tied to Trump and everything. But you ask yourself, any organization that has that receives more than $1 trillion a year, you don't think there's going to be some bureaucratic inertia that comes along with that. So it is a living organism in many ways, and that's why you see it's so very effective at protecting itself. Not just the House voted against that 10% cut, but also the Senate did too. And I think that was roughly a 2/3 to 1/3. And some prominent Democrats voted against that 10% cut in the Senate, including Kamala Harris and I believe Tammy Duckworth, who are both vice presidential contenders. I'm perennially shocked by the obscenity of it, but at the same time too, this is kind of there are several things that there is bipartisan consensus in Washington, D.C., and war making and the military establishment is one of those.
Well, and it's insult to injury because we're right in the throes of this coronavirus funding situation where people are going to be in desperate need of money. And of course, the GOP is threatening to cut Medicare to cover that cost, and Social Security. And so the Democrats, as you mentioned, the vote on that, I looked it up, was 86 to 14, 37 Democrats.
Yeah. Okay. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking that 37 I had stuck in my head. And it was, okay, so it actually was that bad. It was only 14.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they joined with the Republicans for this military budget that's going to keep them from helping people that are going to be in desperate need. And the other thing, and I just happened to, I got this book over, I just happen to have it right here. I talk about it all the time.
Lee's book, yeah.
Bullet points and punchlines. Yeah. One of the most striking things in there that he brought up that I was unaware of, that he talks about all the time, I know you're aware of it, is the military had dodged audits for a number of years. There'd been calls for it. They finally got an audit of the Defense Department. They came up $21 trillion short, disappeared, couldn't account for it, off the books, doesn't know where it is. And the really insidious thing about that, it tells you what a corporate war machine, how the economy and how all of our money and everything is spent on this dirty, dark world military spending thing. $21 trillion, which is basically funny money that nobody could ever account for. It's too much money for the human mind to even sort out.
Yeah, there's no conception. I mean, I think the U.S. economy is $17 trillion in GDP each year.
Yeah.
That type, and that 21 trillion. Yeah, they just couldn't keep track of receipts, basically. So no idea where the money's going out, no idea where the money's coming in, no idea. And there's all types of. I did some procurement and acquisition work when I was part of that whole system. I did a year's worth of it, and so I learned enough about it to know there's all kinds of laws and regulations behind it. There's all kinds of procedures that are supposed to be followed. Money is what's called colored money, so like money is assigned a certain color for what it's supposed to be used for. So if you're going to be using it to purchase something, we call it this color money. If we're using it for operations and maintenance, it's this color money. So it's not like there's not supposedly a system in place, but you can see that system is rigged anyhow. So it's even worse than it's a racket, basically, is what it is. It's a racket. It is the amount of money that is made in this system. Of that, say, let's go back to that $745 billion that just going to be appropriated or was authorized. They'll be appropriated later. Half of that goes to contractors. half of that goes just directly to General Dynamics and Northrop and Raytheon, and which is, and then the other thing about this is the interconnection of all this, and to get to the media aspect of this, because I have a feeling that just as breathlessly CNN and MSNBC and Fox were reporting, WAP, Washington Post, and New York Times were all reporting about these Russian bounty stories, I have a feeling they didn't give too much coverage to the stories about the defense budget, or too much detail about it, let alone the story about the also too, which was shot down in Congress last week. Any attempts to withdraw from Afghanistan were voted down in both the House and the Senate. But with the things with the media is the media has been so complicit with. Major corporate media has been so complicit with the war making machine, with the military, with the intelligence services. I mean, you see retired generals and retired intelligence officials on all the time, and of course, it's never disclosed who they currently work for, which defense organizations they're boards of. Same thing too if a think tank person comes on, some supposed expert comes on, it's never disclosed who funds the organization that he or she works for. So the amount of money that just circulates in the system. And then the real nefarious thing about this, which I'm trying to just get more people to understand, is how the whole system is interconnected, because the same banks and money management firms like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, they are the principal shareholders in all these in all these companies, in all these corporations. So many people know that the 90% of American media is owned by 6 corporations, basically. Yes. Those 6 corporations all have the same principal shareholders as the defense industry does, and as the fossil fuel industry does. In fact, it's so bad that, look at Paul Jay, who last name spelled Jay. He's been doing a lot of great work on this. His calculations are that 95% of the S&P 500 has the same 5 or 6 principal shareholders. You know what I mean? So it's everything is being run by these banks behind the scenes, and the banks are not saying go to war, report anonymous sources or whatever. But what they're saying is that you have to maximize your profits. That's all we care about. And if you, as the board of directors, cannot maximize your profits and bring in growth every year, then we'll find a new board, basically.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's the only good. Yeah. Well, the point that I make to people is their board charter. That's all that there is. There's nothing in there about the public good.
No,
or serving it. It's in there to maximize profits. Yeah,
and so you look at that and you think, okay, what is going to some sensationalist stories about war, patriotism always does well. The bloody flag, bring that thing out, that always does well. And of course with the defense industry, the way you maximize profits is you drop more bombs. But other things are connected with this too, right? The fossil fuel industry, Department of Defense. Our friend Larry Wilkerson, he says this all the time, that ExxonMobil, their biggest client is the Department of Defense. Unless you understand how everyone is coupled together, and then they're part of an establishment. So if one of them is weakened or seem to be losing, then they fear they're all going to be weakened and seen. So that's why you have this support among major industry, among the media, and that then of course percolates into Congress. And if you look at, like, say, a website like Open Secrets, which I really recommend people to do, it's a website that keeps track of campaign donations, you'll see that most members of Congress don't receive large volumes of, say, defense industry contributions. The members of Congress that do receive large defense industry contributions are those who are on the Armed Services Committee. And that's the same for any member of Congress. So if you're on, say, the Agriculture Committee, you receive a lot of donations from big agriculture, right? If you're on healthcare committee, you receive a lot of donations from the health insurers, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. And then what tends to happen is that because each member of Congress has his own little stake there, his own little his or her pie, everyone supports one another. So you go along with whatever your party says in terms of what the committee wants. And that's why you can see members of Congress voting for these things that make, again, the war in Afghanistan has been going on 19 years. Obvious failure. Al-Qaeda has just spread around the globe, right? The war is nowhere to being won. There is the Afghan government itself is incredibly corrupt. They're behind the drug trade that, this opium epidemic that, the last numbers I saw are from 2 years ago, 80,000 Americans dying of opiate overdose. Meanwhile, 85% of the world's opiates come from Afghanistan. And that 20 years ago, none of them were coming from Afghanistan. It doesn't take much to put the connection together about how terrible these wars have been for the United States. Yet the members of Congress keep voting for it. And as you said, with COVID coming up, and right now, it is getting close to the end of July. And the unemployment insurance is expiring. Eviction moratorium expires, I think, at the end of next month.
Yes.
And what are they saying in Congress? We don't have enough money to take care of people. We don't have enough money to take care of our own people. But, of course, $745 billion right to the Pentagon is absolutely no problem for the vast majority of members of Congress of both parties.
Right.
Yeah.
And Pocan's amendment was specifically earmarked. The reason they wanted to save the 10% was to use it for those purposes.
Yeah.
And, of course, the Republicans don't have any desire or need to do any of those things because everything that their donors, everything that their base wanted was given to them in the original CARES Act. So there's no leverage for the Democrats. And politically, it's almost like they're either too dumb or they're in on it, because there were people that saw this coming down the pike when the CARES package was first announced. And I wanted to ask you about something that you were talking about with these major corporate, these war interests, Raytheon, General Dynamic, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, companies like that. I look at these representatives that vote for this war machine and I think, okay, they're protecting their parochial business interests in their home states, or they have big military bases, and that's big money too in their states. I'm sitting here in the state of Iowa. We got no military bases. We have no big military contractors in the state. In 2018, we elected a couple of women, younger women, Democrats, and it was yahoo, man, we're going to finally have some opposition. We're going to tilt the balance of power. And like I said, we worked and donated to get these women into Congress. They voted on these war measures with Steve King. Matt, you know who Steve King is?
Yes,
You're
I
from
know
Iowa?
Steve King, yeah.
My God, I did not send you to Congress to vote with Steve King on anything. I can make your job real simple for you as an elected representative.
Whatever he does,
do
the opposite.
Exactly. Do the opposite. I mean, I am really outraged about this.
Yeah.
And my wife, she's more moderate than I am as a Democrat, and she says, well, make sure that you pick on the Republicans as well as the Democrats. Well, I expect the Republicans to do that. We don't donate to the Republicans. We don't phone bank for them. We don't support them. I don't have any leverage there. I mean, I can raise hell about that, but it won't do any good. I'm going to raise hell about the Democrats that are making all of this possible, and it absolutely just drives me nuts, and it's on the heels of all of this dumbass Russian bounty, Russian stealing vaccines, Russiagate itself. I tell everybody, my God almighty, when you turn on MSNBC and you see CIA spooks on the set, John Brennan is a CIA spook. Jim Clapper. Folks, they are not our friends. I'm a child of the 70s. The FBI and the CIA were never our friends. These were the people that stuck microphones under Martin Luther King's bed in hotel rooms to get him making noises with women that he was having trysts with on the road. Now you're going to support those people, watch them on cable news, and get your news and your perspectives on politics from those people? My God, I am absolutely disgusted. Well,
back to one thing you said there about the CARES Act is you know, and maybe this is cynical, but my view of that, giving away everything to the Republicans, was a move by the Democrats, knowing that the Republicans then would not give anything afterwards because they got what they wanted for their people. And then the idea being that, well, this way the Republicans can be blamed for denying help and for our suffering, you know, American public, and we can use that against them in the polls. Maybe that's me being too cynical, but that's the calculations I have seen and I understand in Washington, that, you know, we know that the Republicans are going to deny this, so then we can use that against them in November. You know, in the meantime, people are going to lose their homes. People are going to, you know, but that's the way, you know, that's the way it works like that oftentimes, because how dumb, you know, and why are they not shutting down? Right? Why are they giving away things? Why are they, you know, it's along the lines of like, if Trump is so unstable and so dangerous, you know, which I agree is, you know, but then why vote to give him a military this big? Why vote to give him usable nuclear weapons? As the phrase is, we have these smaller nuclear weapons. People should just Google this term, usable nuclear weapons. This is something that we actually have now, what the generals and the admirals and various politicians, usable nuclear weapons. Why vote to give Donald Trump, right? I mean, so the whole game of it, the whole charade of it, this idea that somehow there are two really opposing sides is, you know, something that I think people have to snap out of, because for so many issues, it's just one side. You know, and we see that. You could say that with healthcare. You could say that with big agriculture, right? I'm sure that's a big issue for, you know, how many small farmers are there in Iowa, you know. I don't know much about agriculture, but I know that, you know, if you're producing corn and soy, you're doing a lot better than, you know, and that all goes to laws, regulations, subsidies, I mean, and over again. You know, this point about journalism, to go back to, is so key about anonymous sources. Really want to go back to that, because your opening statement about Iowa State not playing football. Now, this is from someone that you know. This is a source. You're going to protect your source. Now, if you find out he's just full of baloney, right? If this is garbage, you're never going to quote him again as an anonymous source, right? And that's what we see over and over again on, right, with major American media, whether it be the New York Times or CNN or whoever. They keep quoting these people that over and over again are not just wrong, but have lied. I mean, in just in the span of the last 20 years, the intelligence people lied about torture. They've lied about the drones. They've lied about Guantanamo Bay. They've lied about all the surveillance that's occurring, all the mass surveillance, you know, lies upon lies, let alone the lies about the wars in Afghanistan, the lies about the wars in Iraq and Libya, you know, and then, of course, Vietnam, the Spanish-American War, the Mexican-American War. I mean, the entire genocide against the Native Americans was propagated by lies about them, you know. I mean, like, so why give any benefit of the doubt to these people who continually lie? And then men like, Clapper, Brennan, Hayden, they have lied they've perjured themselves in front of Congress. And they're professional liars. In 2006, I had applied to be in the CIA, and I had gotten to the point where I was supposed to go to for interviews and everything. And then I got deployed to Iraq. So that had to get put off. And when I came back and I thought about it, and knowing what the CIA did, that they lie. That's just what your job is to lie. I couldn't do it. Like, I just felt that was not something I would be good at, not something that would be good for me. You know, I could continue my government service in other ways, right? So, but that's what they do. They are trained professional liars, and that's how that's their work. That's what spy work is lying.
It literally is their job. I saw an interview not too long ago with Max Blumenthal with the Gray Zone, and he had a former CIA director on that was in charge of the Angola War, and he said a third of his people were involved in propaganda. That's really what their responsibility was propagandizing regarding the Angola War. And it's very simple stuff, to go to your point. He said we would feed people, and if everybody remembers, now this is getting old, but Jack Anderson, he was a highly regarded journalist back in the day. This guy would have blockbuster stories, and he would get them from the CIA. And they had a little rule of thumb. They'd feed him 5 stories, and every 5th story would be pure propaganda, would be completely false, but it would be reported with the same veracity as the other 4. And that's how they were able to, to feed stories. There's that Operation Mockingbird. Woodward and Bernstein and Rolling Stone magazine came out in I think it was in the 80s, and said that, these CIA people are feeding newsrooms. In fact, some of them were even on staff, and now they're right on surreptitiously back then, now they're on the set sitting there, next to Rachel Maddow. My God, I just can't.
And not just, and politicized. And politicized, not overly politicized, not making comments about American foreign policy, about world politics, about, but and saying nothing, but openly politicized. And that these are men that, one, have tremendous influence. Their positions now in private corporations and everything, they're kingmakers. For it, whether it be for profit or for people. And, so they have a very large reach back into those agencies they came from.
Yes.
And this is the way, and I think that interview with Max, I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming probably with John Stockwell.
Yes, it was John Stockwell, yeah.
Whose book, In Search of Enemies, is something, it's up on my shelf back here. And it's one of those books when people ask me about, hey, can you recommend a book so I can understand what's going on? Hey, read this book, In Search of Enemies. I mean, it's 40 years old, but what he talks about in that book is exactly how it is now. Things just don't change. I mean, I recommend people to look and read about the Church Commission, which investigated the actions of the intelligence agencies, and everything that the Church Commission found is still going on. It's just that they reformed them, whatever laws and regulations were put in place, these agencies and institutions just reform themselves so that they can get around it and find new ways of doing what they do. But, and these intelligence agents, anyone who thinks that they're apolitical, the Church Commission found that, say the FBI and other intelligence services have been used for political purposes by every president up until that time.
Sure.
If you think that stopped, so it is. It's very dangerous, the way and the success of it. It's very effective. So to get back to this whole thing about your reporting, you're talking about the Russian bounties, the timing of it.
It
right?
works. Yeah.
It works. And, it also, too, it has ratcheted up tension with Russia. Certainly, you see what's happening with China right now at the closing of the consulates. And what does this all come back to? Well, we've got the Navy wants to buy 7 new aircraft carriers. We're building 2. Each of those aircraft carriers costs about $14 or $15. Yeah, and so the Air Force, these bombers for like $1 billion or $2 billion a plane. The next generation of tanks for the Army will cost, $10 to $15 million per tank, and we're going to buy thousands of them. So you need to have like a boogeyman. You need to have someone to point to and say, we need these weapons. The nuclear weapons budget for the next 30 years is $1.5 trillion for nuclear weapons, right? And we've already got between us and Russia, there's 6,000 active and armed nuclear weapons right now, just between our two countries. 95% of the nuclear weapons are with the U.S. and Russia. And we have people who think that ratcheting up tension between the U.S. and Russia is a good idea.
Yeah. Well, Tulsi Gabbard is one that doesn't. She did get an amendment passed in that NDAA that would prevent the Trump administration from starting. They want to do nuclear testing again. My God, I remember that from my childhood. I can't. They blew up atom bombs in caves and under the ocean. But the Bikini Atoll incident, I'll never forget that. My God, it rained fallout on the little kids, and they played with it on the beach in the Bikini Atoll with that nuclear testing. And Trump wants to do that again. That was one amendment that passed. The Ilhan Omar amendment to expedite withdrawal from Afghanistan failed. So put the icing on the cake here, because we're out of time. But I mean, there's nobody that knows the circumstances in Afghanistan better than you, Matt. How futile and how stupid is it at this juncture, particularly after the release of the Afghanistan papers and everything that we know? You know it firsthand, but my God, armchair people know now what folly that is for us to stay in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it is. But there are elements within the United States that benefit from staying in Afghanistan. Not much, not many people. I mean, when you look at the aggregate, right, just really a handful of people. But certainly, what you have within the foreign policy establishment is this understanding that retreat from any part of the globe signifies weakness, and that can lead then to further retreat. And the maintenance of the American empire, the maintenance of the globe under the American flag is the primary concern of all of the Council of Foreign Relations, right? Of all these people who are foreign policy and military members, experts, et cetera. That is their primary goal. So, I mean, certainly the defense industry would love to see us go to war in every country because that's more bombs dropped, right? You certainly have warmongers out there. But and then you have these people who feel that we have to stay in Afghanistan because that's a hedge against China, because China has its Silk Road initiative. And we have to be there to keep an eye on China as well, to balance their intentions as well, to compete with them commercially. The twists and contortions that these people put themselves through to justify is really quite remarkable. But it ultimately comes back to this idea of American supremacy, of American dominance, of American empire, the idea that we cannot retreat from anywhere. And that's what keeps it all going. I mean, and then, of course, there are various groups that profit from it in different ways. Staying there, staying involved around the world, having our 800 bases around the world. This idea about nuclear testing, which is just insane. They've tested our nuclear weapons. Our nuclear weapons work for 150 years. Right. That's how long the plutonium pit, the thing that actually is the trigger, that's how long that thing works for, is 150 years. We know this. But somehow we have to now test nuclear weapons and they've tried out the reasons, for safety reasons or reliability. It's all garbage. It's just to make more money. But there are also those who want to see exploding American nuclear bombs because that shows off to the world that we mean business, right? That we have this ability to destroy you, wipe you off the map, etc.
100 times over. Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yeah,
we need to prove that it's not 100 times over; it's 150 times over. I mean,
it's more than that. It's actually, if you look at what the people at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, what they put out, it's 1/10 of 1% of the world's nuclear weapons would destroy human life.
Yeah, I've heard that.
That's all we need. 100. It's roughly about 100 nuclear weapons would end life on Earth as we know it because of nuclear winter and other things. And we know this. This is something that
one time that one nuclear sub could do the job. One Trident.
One Trident. Yeah. Way more. Yeah, a Trident has much more than we need. Yeah, one Trident is. The Trident is the most sophisticated killing machine the world has ever known. You know what I mean? Like, and I can't imagine what else you're going to create that is going to be more capable of mass murder. The next generation of nuclear weapons, which have been funded and we're building, and the next generation of submarines to replace the current nuclear and ballistic missile submarines, the Columbia class, $8 billion a piece for those. just so we can have these things floating around under the water, ready to destroy all life on the planet.
Yeah, in the next 20 minutes. I mean, honest to God,
exactly.
we live under that threat.
That's how long it would take, about 20 minutes. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, one final question here. And this goes again to the heart of the matter in my discussion with our Iowa delegation here in this anti-war vote. A lot of them will tell you the reason they vote for that is so they can take care of our vets like you, so that you get the benefits that you so richly deserve. And if they don't approve these war budgets, if they don't approve this defense spending, people like you are going to end up on the street corner with a tin can full of pencils. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, stop the wars. You'll stop making people like me. That's a pretty simple way to go about it. If you fully fund healthcare for everybody in this country, then nobody has to worry about it. There's no reason why, as a veteran, I should get fully funded healthcare, except for mock patriotism, mock sentimentality, et cetera, et cetera. If we fully fund healthcare for everybody, then of course we don't have to worry about such things, as well as to have appropriate safety nets, but that's not, and the idea that they're fully funding healthcare for veterans is just not true.
Yes.
The VA has about 50,000 vacancies right now. That's about 1 in 7 positions at the VA are currently unfilled, and they're not being filled. They're not hiring. And there's this real push. They've not been so successful, but eventually they will be, to privatize the VA, because it's a huge cash cow. The VA is more than $200 billion a year in funding. It's the second largest federal agency, larger than Homeland Security, which itself is quite big. But this is a huge cash cow for the most part, it is completely government run. It's not like, say, Department of Defense, where half of that $745 billion goes right away to private corporations. Bulk of the money stays within the government. And so it's a huge prize to be privatized. And there are movements out there, Save Our VA, if people want to look that up, Google that. There are people out there working to save it, because people have their sights on it, and it would make people a lot of money.
Yeah, it sounds like a Koch brother initiative. They wanted to get rid of the
it is a
post
Koch
office.
brother initiative. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
honest to God.
There's a group out there called Concerned Veterans for America, who are actually really good on Afghanistan and other things, but they were started with the purpose of privatizing the VA. And the whole thing with the VA is, you fully resource it, fully fund it, you won't have these wait time issues. You won't have other problems. If you look at the studies that are done, veterans healthcare consistently outperforms private healthcare. And they bring up wait times, and actually, say it's 21 days to get an appointment at the VA. If you look at the numbers, well, it's 23 days to get an appointment in private healthcare. The veterans healthcare actually outperforms private healthcare, but again, the amount of money there, who cares about truth or facts or reality? Yeah.
And I guess maybe that puts a ribbon on it for today. Don't let anybody tell you that we don't have the $21 trillion is just missing from the defense budget accounting. The CARES Act, they just ginned up $5 trillion and just shot it in a money bazooka.
Like that. Exactly.
Just like that. No problem whatsoever, folks. They have got the money. It's just whether or not they want to spend it on us or them. And so far, we're not doing too well in this struggle.
That's right. And this idea that somehow our taxes pay for what the federal, that's just not how our money system works. It's not like you write a check to the IRS, and then that money gets put into an account, and then that's the money that they use to pay for all these different things. That's not how our money system works. That's not how money gets put into the economy. That's not how the government actually spends money. Yeah, it's the whole it's a racket.
Yeah, well, I couldn't.
That.
I used to have people come up to me and talk about MMT, the modern monetary theory, and I don't know if I understand that, and I don't know if that's really true. Well, okay, The CARES
Exactly.
Act proves the emperor has no clothes, folks. Let me tell you something. If you ever needed proof that MMT was reality, that they just move a decimal point on a computer screen
exactly right.
and puke money for whatever they want to have it for, the CARES Act is proof positive. Well, we're out of time. This was great. We were actually much longer than I normally go, but it's well worth it. I love to have this guy on the show, folks, and for obvious reasons. Matt, thanks for coming on A Podcast by George.
Thanks for having me on, George.
Yeah, it was great. I want to read this here at the end. I know this is long, but I don't think I'm going to read some of it anyway. Matthew Ho has nearly 12 years' experience with America's wars overseas with the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, and State Department. He's been a senior fellow with the Center for International Policy. And he resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan with the State Department over the American escalation of the war. And prior to that assignment in Afghanistan, Matthew took part in the American occupation of Iraq in Saladin Province with a State Department Reconstruction and Governance team, and then in 2006-07 in Anbar Province as a Marine Corps company commander. And, of course, he's heard all over the world, really. I love to go through this lineup of places that he's been interviewed. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Defense News, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post. And on the networks, he's been on BBC, CBS, CNN, C-SPAN, Fox, NBC, MSNBC, NPR, Pacifica, RT, and, of course, frequently, and I hope more often, Podcast by George. That's going to wrap it up, folks. That's going to do it. Yeah,
such
Matt.
a long thing.
That's all right. Thanks, pal. Thanks for coming back on. That's going to wrap it up for today. If you like Podcast by George, please subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. And, any platform where podcasts are seen or heard, iTunes is a good place to get the audio-only versions. But to get the video, really YouTube and Facebook are the places to go. But that's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.